You are about to make a decision. Maybe it's about money. Maybe it's about someone you just met. Maybe it's about a risk you're evaluating, a job, a relationship, an investment, a choice that feels like it matters. And you believe, without really examining the belief, that you will think it through, that you will weigh the evidence, that you will arrive at the most reasonable conclusion available. Daniel Kahneman spent 50 years of research showing that this belief, in almost every case, is wrong. Not because you're not intelligent, not because you're careless, but because the brain you are using to make decisions was not designed to be rational. It was designed to be fast. And fast, most of the time, means something is being skipped. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics for this work, not in psychology, in economics. Because what he found about how humans actually make decisions dismantled the foundational assumption of classical economics, that people, given information, will behave rationally. They don't. We don't. And this book is the most complete account ever written of exactly how and why. Kahneman opens the book with a framework that sounds simple and turns out to explain almost everything that follows. The mind, he argues, operates in two distinct modes. He calls them System 1 and System 2, not because they are literal brain regions, but because they represent two fundamentally different ways of processing the world. System 1 is fast, automatic, and effortless. It runs constantly in the background, processing your environment, making associations, forming impressions, generating feelings. It is what allows you to read these words without sounding them out. Recognize a friend's face instantly across a crowded room. Sense that something feels wrong before you can explain why. System 1 does not deliberate. It produces answers before you ask the question. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and effortful. It is what you use when you calculate a complex equation, park a car in a tight space, fill out a complicated form, or make a decision you want to think through carefully. System 2 requires attention. It tires. It has limited capacity. And crucially, it is lazy. It avoids activation whenever possible. The central claim of the book is this: we believe we are primarily System 2 creatures, rational, deliberate, in control of our reasoning. In reality, System 1 runs the show most of the time, and System 2 mostly serves to rationalize whatever System 1 has already decided. Here's a quick test. Don't overthink it. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Your System 1 almost certainly said 10 cents. The correct answer is 5 cents. If you got it wrong, you are not unusual. Most people at elite universities get it wrong. That is not an intelligence failure. That is System 1 doing exactly what it was designed to do, providing a fast, plausible answer before System 2 could engage. System 1 navigates the world through heuristics, mental shortcuts that allow fast, efficient judgments, without the cost of full analysis. Most of the time, heuristics work. That is why they exist. The problem is that they also produce systematic, predictable errors in specific, well-documented patterns. Kahneman identifies three that matter most. The availability heuristic. You judge the likelihood of something by how easily an example comes to mind. If you can think of it quickly, your brain concludes it must be common. This is why people overestimate the risk of plane crashes after seeing news coverage of one, and underestimate the risk of driving, which kills far more people, but generates far less memorable imagery. Availability is a proxy for frequency. It is not the same thing. The representativeness heuristic. You judge the likelihood that something belongs to a category by how much it resembles the prototype of that category. Kahneman's example. If someone is described as quiet, precise, and interested in detail, most people conclude they are probably a librarian rather than a farmer, despite the fact that there are vastly more farmers than librarians. The description fits the stereotype of a librarian. The statistics favor the farmer. System 1 picks the stereotype. Anchoring. When you are exposed to a number before making an estimate, that number pulls your estimate toward it, regardless of whether it is relevant. In one study, people who spun a wheel that stopped at 65 before estimating the percentage of African countries in the UN gave significantly higher estimates than those whose wheel stopped at 10, a completely arbitrary number. A measurable effect. This is not a quirk of the study. It is a consistent feature. of how System 1 processes numerical information. Something worth examining this week. Identify one recent judgment you made about a person. First impression, professional assessment, casual opinion. Now ask, what information was actually? Kahneman introduces a concept midway through the book that quietly explains most of what has come before, and most of what comes after. He calls it WYSIATI, what you see is all there is. System 1 builds its conclusions from whatever information is currently available and treats that information as if it were the complete picture. It does not pause to ask what is missing. It does not check for gaps. It constructs a coherent story from what it has, and that story feels true because it is internally consistent, not because it is accurate. The less you know, the more confident System 1 becomes. This is not a paradox. It is a feature. With less information, there are fewer inconsistencies to manage, and the story snaps together more cleanly. This is why first impressions are so persistent. The initial information you received about someone became the frame through which all subsequent information was interpreted. Wysiati built a story from the first data points, and then fitted everything else into it. It is also why experts in complex fields are often more overconfident than novices. They have more sophisticated System 1 patterns, more elaborate stories they can construct quickly and coherently, and System 2 trusts the fluency of those stories more than it should. The question this raises: think of a strong opinion you currently hold about a person, a situation, a decision you are facing. What information would need to exist that you don't currently have to make that opinion wrong? If you cannot answer that easily, Wysiati is already running. This is where the Nobel Prize came from. Kahneman and his longtime collaborator Amos Tversky developed prospect theory, a framework for how people actually evaluate risk and potential outcomes, as opposed to how classical economics assumed they did. The central finding is loss aversion. Losses feel approximately twice as powerful as equivalent gains. Losing $100 produces roughly twice the psychological pain as gaining $100 produces pleasure. This is not rational in the economic sense. A $100 change in net worth is a $100 change in net worth, regardless of direction. But the brain does not process it that way. The brain weighs losses more heavily, a bias rooted in the evolutionary logic that avoiding threats was more urgent than capturing opportunities. The practical consequences are everywhere. Investors hold losing stocks too long because selling would make the loss feel real and final. They sell winning stocks too early because the fear of losing the gain outweighs the potential of further gain. Both decisions, analyzed objectively, are wrong. Both are completely predictable from loss aversion. Businesses frame choices to exploit this. Don't miss out, outperforms, take advantage of. Protect what you've built, outperforms, grow what you have. These are not equivalent statements in the brain, even when they describe the same situation. The framing effect, closely related, shows that the way a choice is presented changes how it is made, independent of the content. In one of Kahneman's most cited studies, a disease is expected to kill 600 people. Group A is told, Program A will save 200 lives. Group B is told, Program B will result in 400 deaths. The programs are identical. The outcomes are identical. But most of Group A chose Program A, the gain frame. Most of Group B chose the alternative, the loss frame. Same facts, different frame, different decision. Before moving on, a direct application. Look at the last 3 significant decisions you avoided making. Not the ones you decided against, the ones you kept deferring. In most cases, deferral is loss aversion in disguise. The potential loss from being wrong feels larger than the potential gain from being right. Naming that dynamic does not eliminate it, but it gives System 2 something to work with. Kahneman is particularly hard on overconfidence, and he has the data to justify it. The planning fallacy. People consistently underestimate how long projects will take, how much they will cost, and how many things can go wrong. Not because they are optimistic by nature, but because when planning, System 1 constructs a best-case scenario, and System 2 does not sufficiently correct for it. The solution Kahneman proposes is the outside view. Instead of reasoning from the specifics of your project, ask, what is the base rate? How long do projects like this typically take? What percentage of similar ventures succeed? Then use that data as your starting estimate and adjust from there, rather than building up from scratch. He also identifies what he calls the illusion of validity, the conviction that a coherent, internally consistent story constitutes evidence. It does not. A story that makes sense is not the same as a story that is true. System 1 generates coherent narratives constantly. The coherence feels like confirmation. It is not. One thing to apply immediately. The next time you are planning something, a project, a timeline, a budget, an estimate of how something will go. Before you commit to your number, find the base rate. What does this type of thing typically look like in reality? Start from the outside, then adjust for the specific. The adjustment will almost always be smaller than your instinct and closer to correct. In the final section of the book, Kahneman introduces a distinction that reframes what it means to be happy, and it is one of the most underappreciated ideas in the entire book. There are, he argues, two selves involved in any experience. The experiencing self lives in the present moment, the you that feels the pleasure or pain of what is happening, right now, in real time, moment by moment. The remembering self is the one that evaluates the experience. After it is over, that constructs the story of what it was like, rates whether it was good or bad, decides whether to do it again. The critical insight: these two selves have different interests, and they disagree constantly. In one study, patients undergoing a painful medical procedure were asked to rate their experience. The procedure was deliberately extended at the end, with a period of reduced but still uncomfortable pain. The patients with the extended procedure rated the overall experience as less unpleasant, despite objectively experiencing more total pain. Why? Because the remembering self judges by the peak experience. In the ending, the final moments were less painful. The story ended on a relative high. The total duration barely mattered. This has significant implications. We make decisions based on what we expect to remember, not on what we expect to experience. We choose vacations for the memories and photos, rather than for the daily quality of the experience. We endure difficult endings to protect the story. We sacrifice present moments for narratives about them. The deeper question this raises: think of something you are currently working toward, a goal, a milestone, an experience you are anticipating. Are you optimizing for the experience itself, or for how you expect it to look in memory? Neither answer is wrong, but knowing which one gives you more control over whether you will actually be satisfied when you get there. Kahneman died in March 2024 at the age of 90. In the decade before his death, something uncomfortable happened to the field he helped build. The replication crisis in psychology called into question a significant number of studies that had been widely cited, including several that appear prominently in this book. The priming studies, Chapter 4, which argues that subtle environmental cues can meaningfully change behavior, have largely failed to replicate the experiments suggesting that holding a warm cup of coffee makes people judge strangers as warmer, or that thinking about elderly people makes you walk more slowly. These did not hold up under rigorous replication. Kahneman responded publicly and without defensiveness. He acknowledged that he had placed too much faith in underpowered studies and that the behavioral priming evidence was weaker than he had presented it. That response, a Nobel laureate publicly revising his position based on evidence, is how science is supposed to work, and it is worth acknowledging. What did survive? Substantially more than what failed. Loss aversion is real. Anchoring is real. Framing effects are real. The availability heuristic is real. The core System 1/System 2 framework, while a simplification, reflects something genuine about how cognition operates under different conditions. The foundation of the book stands. The periphery, particularly the priming chapter, does not. Reading this book knowing that distinction makes it more useful, not less. You know which ideas are built on decades of robust evidence, and which were plausible at the time and later failed the test. That is a better position than reading it uncritically. Kahneman ends the book not with solutions, but with humility. He does not argue that knowing about cognitive biases makes you immune to them. The research strongly suggests it does not. Even Kahneman himself was subject to the biases he spent his career documenting. What knowing does is narrow the gap. It gives System 2 a vocabulary and a trigger point. It creates the possibility, not the guarantee, of slowing down when slowing down would help. He proposes one practical change that the evidence supports. Organizations can design better decision-making processes than individuals can. Checklists, structured evaluation, pre-mortems that force consideration of failure scenarios, rules that require the outside view before finalizing estimates. The individual mind is not easily fixed. The environment in which the individual mind makes decisions can be. That is a modest conclusion for a book of this scope. It is also an honest one, which, given everything else the book says about the gap between story and evidence, is exactly the right way to end it. If one idea from this video changed how you are going to look at a decision you're currently facing, that is the point of the book. Not to make you feel clever for knowing about biases. To make one decision, one time, slightly more deliberate than it would have been otherwise. If this is the kind of reading you want more of, subscribe. We go through one book at a time, without rushing, and we try to tell you when the science is solid and when it isn't. One question for the comments. Which bias from this video did you recognize most immediately in yourself? Not in other people. In yourself. Drop it below. I read every one.